Welcome to our channel. Here we dive into the hidden lives of history's most fascinating figures, exploring untold stories, unexpected twists, and the legacy left behind. Join us as we uncover secrets, reveal insights, and bring history to life in an engaging, thought-provoking way. Don't forget to subscribe. Hidden Lives of the Six Wives. Uncovering untold stories of Henry VIII Queens. Part 1. The Curtain Rises. Introducing the Forgotten Voices. They are names most people know: Catherine of Aragon, Anne Boleyn, Jane Seymour, Anne of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr. But ask someone to describe who they really were, as women, not just wives, and the room often falls silent. Their fates are well rehearsed. Divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Yet this rhythm, catchy as it is, has reduced these six very real women to a tragic rhyme and little else. Behind the dramatic headlines and royal decrees, behind the towering figure of King Henry VIII, each of these women had a story worth telling. A story of dreams pursued and lost, of ambitions carefully cultivated, of rivalries, friendships, and survival in one of the most perilous courts in European history. They were not just background figures in a king's turbulent life. They were individuals shaped by their cultures, their educations, their families, and their own desires. Catherine of Aragon, born into the most powerful dynasty in Europe, arrived in England as a young bride meant for Prince Arthur. She would become queen to Henry, but her greatest strength may have been her unwavering conviction and dignity in the face of betrayal. Her piety was not weakness, it was a weapon, and it allowed her to stand firm when many others would have crumbled. And Boleyn was unlike any queen England had ever seen before. Educated in the courts of Europe, fluent in politics and fashion, she captivated not just Henry, but an entire generation. She was bold, charismatic, and dangerously clever. Yet her ambition made her a target, and her rise ended in heartbreak, not because she lacked power, but because she had too much. Jane Seymour is remembered for giving Henry the son he desperately craved. But there was more to Jane than just her womb. She played a quiet but pivotal role in reconciling a broken royal family, smoothing over wounds opened by divorce and political conflict. Her gentleness belied a sharp understanding of her role and its responsibilities. Anne of Cleves, often mocked for her appearance, was a woman out of place in the English court, but not out of her depth. She negotiated her way into a rare freedom for a royal woman, maintaining wealth, dignity, and independence. She was underestimated by many, but she never underestimated herself. Catherine Howard's story is often told as a cautionary tale of youthful folly. Yet what is missed is the environment of manipulation she endured. A girl with little education and even less guidance, surrounded by predators and opportunists, she was doomed before she had a chance to defend herself. And finally, Catherine Parr, the woman who survived. She was a writer, a reformer, and a deeply thoughtful scholar. Not only did she navigate the dangers of Henry's final years, she helped shape the education of the future Elizabeth I. She showed that survival in the Tudor court required not just faith, but brilliance and restraint. Each of these women walked into the Tudor court with a different past. Each brought something new to the English throne: strength, intelligence, compassion, passion, vision, or resilience. And each paid a price for her position, in ways often more private than public. This story, Hidden Lives of the Six Wives, is not about their deaths or their husbands. It is about their minds, their hearts, and the legacies they left behind in spite of being overshadowed. Their voices were once whispered behind palace walls. Now we bring them forward, one by one. Their stories begin here. Part 2. Catherine of Aragon, a princess in her own right. Long before she wore the English crown, Catherine of Aragon was a child of empire. Born on December 16, 1485, in the Grand Palace of Alcalá de Henares, she entered the world already marked for greatness. She was the youngest daughter of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, a power couple whose union had effectively created modern Spain. Catherine was not simply royalty. She was the embodiment of Europe's rising strength, groomed from the start to carry dynastic purpose and divine destiny. Her upbringing was steeped in the values of Catholic piety, loyalty, and scholarly excellence. She was taught Latin, theology, philosophy, canon law, and classical literature, a rare education for a girl, even of noble birth. Her mother, Queen Isabella, insisted on intellectual rigor and moral discipline. Catherine grew into a woman who could hold her own in any conversation, whether with priests, poets, or kings. At age 3, her marriage was already being negotiated. By the time she turned 15, she had traveled across Europe to become the wife of Prince Arthur, the eldest son of Henry VII of England. Their union was intended to cement the alliance between England and Spain, two rising Catholic powers in an increasingly uncertain Europe. But her life in England began under a cold and unkind sky. Though welcomed at court, she found herself in a land unfamiliar in language, custom, and climate. Her marriage to Arthur was brief and fraught with illness. Only 5 months after their wedding, Arthur died. Suddenly, Catherine, once a prized diplomatic bride, was left widowed, stranded, and politically uncertain. For 7 long years, she remained in England, a young widow with dwindling prospects. Her dowry became a matter of financial dispute between the English and Spanish courts. She lived with a reduced household, often isolated, and deeply worried about her future. Yet even in those years of waiting, she did not bend. She wrote letters, kept her studies, and maintained her dignity in a court that often ignored her presence. Then came Henry, Arthur's younger brother. He was 10 when she first arrived in England, but he grew into a young king eager to begin his reign with strength and splendor. Their marriage in 1509 was a fresh beginning for both of them. And for a time, it was filled with affection, mutual respect, and hope for heirs. Catherine was not a passive queen. She acted as regent when Henry went to war, even leading a successful defense against Scottish invasion at the Battle of Flodden. She gave speeches, offered counsel, and was widely admired for her grace and moral clarity. She was deeply religious, but never self-righteous. Her faith guided her, even when it began to divide her from her husband. Above all, Catherine saw herself as chosen, by God and by duty. Her role was not simply to love Henry, but to preserve the legitimacy of their marriage and their daughter, Mary. When Henry sought annulment after 20 years of marriage, Catherine did not flee or falter. She stood her ground, declaring herself Henry's true and lawful wife, not just in front of courtiers, but before cardinals and kings. Catherine of Aragon was more than the woman Henry divorced. She was a scholar, a ruler, a diplomat, and a mother who endured grief after grief, yet never lost her inner compass. Her hidden life was one of silent strength and steady defiance. The court may have tried to forget her, but history could not. She began this story with a crown of Spanish gold. She ends it with something even rarer, a legacy of unwavering integrity. Part 3. Catherine of Aragon, the loyal queen and the silent struggle. Catherine of Aragon's queenship began with joy and promise. Her marriage to Henry VIII was celebrated across England, marking the union of two powerful dynasties and the hopeful birth of a new golden age. For a time, it seemed nothing could shake their bond. Henry was young, athletic, and adoring. Catherine, elegant and wise, was the perfect consort, admired not only for her beauty, but also for her intellect and devotion. In the early years, they were a team. She advised him on diplomatic affairs, stood beside him at royal ceremonies, and served as regent during his campaigns abroad. When Henry rode off to war with France in 1513, Catherine was left to rule in his stead. In his absence, she faced a Scottish invasion. But Catherine rose to the moment. She rallied the English army and contributed to the victory at the Battle of Flodden. She even sent Henry the bloodied coat of the defeated Scottish king as a symbol of triumph. But behind the pageantry, her private life was steeped in sorrow. Catherine experienced multiple pregnancies, at least 6, but only one child survived infancy. That child was a daughter, Mary, born in 1516. To Henry, the absence of a male heir was a growing concern. To Catherine, it was a wound that never fully healed. Each miscarriage, each stillbirth, each infant death cut deeper than the last. Catherine prayed, fasted, and grieved in silence. She endured the whispered doubts at court and the growing impatience of her husband. And yet, she never blamed God, nor herself. Her strength during these tragedies was rooted in faith and an unshakable sense of duty to both God and country. As the years passed, the shadows around her thickened. Henry, once tender and devoted, became restless. He began to look elsewhere, first with flirtations, then with a growing fascination for one woman in particular, Anne Boleyn. Catherine knew. She saw the change in his eyes, the subtle distance between them, the way the court turned its attention toward his charm and youthful energy. Still, Catherine did not yield. She insisted she was Henry's true and lawful wife, that their marriage, solemnized before God, could not be undone. When Henry petitioned the Pope for an annulment, she responded not with anger, but with calm and unwavering determination. In public and in private, she refused to step aside. She faced interrogation after interrogation, humiliation after humiliation. She was banished from court, separated from her daughter, and stripped of her title, now referred to merely as the Dowager Princess of Wales. Yet even in disgrace, Catherine held to her truth. In 1529, during the famous trial at Blackfriars, she delivered one of the most moving speeches in Tudor history. She knelt before Henry, the man who had once called her his only love, and pleaded her case, not with bitterness, but with grace. She reminded him of their shared past, of her loyalty, of her conscience. Then, with quiet dignity, she rose and walked out of the court. She would not return. The final years of her life were spent in enforced isolation at Kimbolton Castle. She lived simply, dressed modestly, and continued her devotions. Even as her health declined, she wrote to Henry, not as an enemy, but as a wife who still prayed for his soul. She never stopped loving him, and she never accepted that their marriage was invalid. Catherine of Aragon died on January 7, 1536. Alone in body, but not in spirit. Her legacy was one of courage, piety, and quiet resistance. She was a queen whose power came not from a throne, but from the strength of her soul. Part 4, and Boleyn, from courtly shadows to the throne. And Boleyn's name has echoed through the centuries, often as a seductress, a temptress, a villain. But beneath the myth lies a woman far more complex. She was not born to be queen, nor raised to be loved by a king. She was a diplomat's daughter, educated in European courts, shaped by politics and elegance, wit and ambition. Born sometime around 1501, and spent her formative years not in England, but in the Netherlands, and then at the glittering courts of France. There, she absorbed the polish of French culture, fashion, music, religious reform, and the art of conversation. Her intelligence was sharpened, her manners refined. By the time she returned to England, she was not just another lady-in-waiting. She was a woman of rare sophistication. She first served Queen Catherine of Aragon, attending the same court where she would later steal the king's heart. But Anne's rise did not begin with scandal. In fact, it began with refusal. Henry VIII, charmed by her beauty and mind, pursued her as he had others before, but said no, again and again. She would not be his mistress. If he wanted her, he would have to marry her. This resistance was not merely coyness. It was calculation, strength, and self-preservation. Anne knew what it meant to become a royal mistress, and how quickly power could turn to ruin in Henry's court. She also believed she was destined for something greater. What followed was a courtship that would shake Europe. Henry, already growing disillusioned with Catherine and desperate for a male heir, became obsessed. He petitioned the Pope to annul his marriage. When the Church hesitated, he broke with Rome entirely, triggering the English Reformation. And at the heart of that storm stood Anne Boleyn. She was crowned queen in June 1533, her belly already swelling with what both she and Henry believed would be a son, but the child was a girl, Elizabeth. And with that single event, Anne's future began to unravel. Anne Boleyn was not a passive queen. She was deeply involved in religious reform, promoting Protestant thinkers, sponsoring scholars, and challenging the traditions of the Catholic Church. She was bold, outspoken, and politically savvy. But she was also surrounded by enemies, courtiers loyal to Catherine, conservatives who hated her influence, and rivals who watched her every misstep. She gave birth to 2 more children, both lost before term. Henry grew frustrated. He began to believe God had cursed their union. The court turned cold. Anne's allies dwindled. Then, in 1536, she was arrested. The charges were shocking: adultery, incest, treason. Most now agree they were fabricated, a web of lies spun to justify her removal. She was convicted in a sham trial and sentenced to death. On May 19, 1536, Anne Boleyn was executed at the Tower of London. She met her death with calm and grace, kneeling before a French swordsman, her final words filled with prayer and dignity. Anne's life and death changed England forever. She was mother to Elizabeth I, one of the greatest monarchs in English history. She helped usher in the Reformation and redefine the monarchy itself. But perhaps her most hidden truth was this: Anne Boleyn was never just a pawn in Henry's game. She was a player in her own right. And though her time on the throne was brief, her shadow stretches long across the pages of history. Part 5, Anne Boleyn, Power, Paranoia, and the Fall. and Boleyn's ascent to the throne was hard-won, and her fall would be just as swift. Once the crown graced her head, she had everything to lose. And in the treacherous world of Henry VIII's court, enemies never waited long. The same boldness that had captivated the king became a threat to those who prized obedience and silence in a queen, and was not silent, and she never intended to be. Her reign as queen was marked by ambition, reform, and relentless pressure to produce a male heir. The birth of her daughter Elizabeth in 1533 had been a disappointment to Henry, though, and had presented her with pride. Still, and remained confident. She was young, healthy, and believed that a son would come, but each passing year made that hope more desperate. Her second and third pregnancies ended in miscarriage. The final blow came in January 1536, when she lost a child believed to be male, the same month that Catherine of Aragon died. With Catherine gone, Anne's only true rival in legitimacy had been removed. But the timing was cruel. Henry had already begun to look toward Jane Seymour, demure, obedient, and everything, and was not. Anne's personality had always divided the court. She was witty, fiercely intelligent, and unafraid to challenge Henry in both private and public. She supported religious reformers, challenged conservative nobles, and insisted on courtly respect. But her enemies saw her as arrogant and domineering. Even those who had once supported her began to drift away. Henry, too, had changed. The king who had once written her love letters and risked his soul to marry her now viewed, and with suspicion. He began to see her sharp tongue as disrespectful, her miscarriages as divine judgment, her failure to bear a son as betrayal of his legacy. In this climate of paranoia and fading affection, Anne's downfall was orchestrated with chilling speed. Thomas Cromwell, once her ally in religious reform, turned against her. Some say it was political survival. Others suggest personal animosity or Henry's direct command. Either way, a plan was set in motion, one that would end with Anne's head on the block. In April 1536, a series of arrests shocked the court. Men close to the Queen, including her own brother George Boleyn, were charged with adultery and treason. And herself was arrested on May 2nd and taken to the Tower of London. The charges were lurid and absurd: infidelity with multiple men, incest, and plotting the king's death. There was no concrete evidence, only whispered accusations and coerced confessions. Anne's trial was a spectacle. Held at the Tower, it drew nobles, gossipers, and enemies hungry for her ruin. She defended herself with grace and intelligence, denying all charges with poise. But the verdict was decided long before the trial began. Sentenced to death, and requested that a skilled French swordsman be brought for her execution, a final gesture of dignity amid the cruelty. On May 19th, she dressed in gray damask with a crimson robe beneath. She knelt before the sword, her final words a prayer for the king. Not because she loved him still, but because she knew her legacy depended on how she fell. And Boleyn died with dignity, her life taken, but her story not silenced. History would remember her as the queen who lost her head. But her hidden life tells us so much more. She was a woman of fierce ambition, intellect, and courage. And in her daughter, Elizabeth I, she would live on, reshaping the very world that had tried to destroy her. Part 6. Jane Seymour, the quiet queen with a powerful legacy. Jane Seymour entered Henry VIII's life at a moment when his heart was weary and the court was thick with scandal. Where and Boleyn had been fire, wit, and defiance, Jane was calm, modest, and seemingly submissive. Her gentleness was not weakness, it was strategy. And in many ways, it was exactly what Henry craved after the turbulence of Anne's reign. Jane came from a noble but modestly connected family, the Seymours of Woolfall. Unlike Catherine or Anne, Jane had received little formal education. But what she lacked in scholarly polish, she made up for in observation and timing. She had served both Catherine of Aragon and Anne Boleyn, watching closely the rise and fall of queens. And she had learned that in the Tudor court, silence could be as powerful as speech. By 1536, Jane had caught Henry's eye. She was placed in Anne Boleyn's household, a move that many believe was orchestrated by her ambitious brothers, Edward and Thomas. Henry's courtship was rapid and intense, fueled by his dissatisfaction with, and the desperate desire for a male heir. Jane did not resist him outright, but neither did she surrender to his advances. Like and before her, she insisted on marriage. But unlike Anne, she never challenged the king, at least not openly. Just 11 days after Anne Boleyn's execution, Jane Seymour was married to Henry VIII. The speed of the union shocked many. But Jane remained composed, cloaking herself in humility and obedience. She rarely involved herself in politics and never expressed strong opinions in public. To many, she seemed the perfect Tudor queen, quiet, obedient, and fertile. Her crowning moment came in October 1537, when she gave birth to a healthy son, Edward, the long-awaited male heir. Henry was ecstatic. He saw Edward as the fulfillment of his dynastic hopes, proof that God had finally smiled upon him. Jane, exhausted but radiant, had secured her place in history. She was the only wife to give Henry what he most desired. But the triumph was short-lived. Just days after Edward's birth, Jane fell gravely ill. She had contracted puerperal fever, a common and deadly infection following childbirth. Despite the best efforts of her physicians, Jane's condition worsened. On October 24, 1537, less than 2 weeks after delivering her son, she died. Henry mourned her deeply. More than any of his other wives, Jane remained untouched by scandal in his eyes. He spoke of her as his true queen, the one who had given him a prince. Even years later, as he married again and again, it was Jane he chose to be buried beside. But Jane's story is not just one of brief queenship and tragic death. It's also one of quiet influence and enduring legacy. Her family rose swiftly after her marriage. Her brother Edward Seymour would become Lord Protector during King Edward VII's minority. And though she never ruled as a regent or led armies, her short time as queen changed the course of English history. In her silence, Jane Seymour wielded remarkable power, not through rebellion or reform, but through patience, calculation, and sacrifice. She did not live long enough to see her son grow or her name enshrined in legend. Yet in death, she became the symbol of the ideal Tudor queen, demure, dutiful, and ultimately victorious. Part 7. Anne of Cleves, the queen who survived the king. When Anne of Cleves arrived in England in 1539, she knew little of the language, the customs, or the man she was to marry. Henry VIII had seen only a portrait, a flattering likeness painted by Hans Holbein the Younger. She was chosen not just for her looks, but for politics. England needed allies, and the Protestant Duchy of Cleves offered just that. Anne's marriage was meant to strengthen ties against the looming threat of Catholic powers like France and the Holy Roman Empire. She was 24 years old, older than Henry's previous brides, and unprepared for the complex rituals of the English court. Raised in a pious, modest household, and was unfamiliar with flirtation, courtly games, or even dancing. Her education had emphasized obedience, religion, and the domestic virtues. When Henry finally met her in person, disguised in the fashion of romantic tradition, and failed to react, she did not recognize him or fall into his arms as expected. Instead, she greeted him with confusion. That moment, seemingly small, planted a seed of disappointment in Henry's mind. He found her unattractive, calling her the Flanders mare, a cruel and exaggerated insult that would shadow her for centuries. But more than her looks, he disliked her lack of polish, the courtly charm that his previous wives had mastered. Nonetheless, the marriage went forward. Henry could not afford to insult the Cleves alliance by canceling it without cause. They were married on January 6, 1540, but Henry claimed he was unable to consummate the union. Whether this was due to physical revulsion, political cold feet, or deeper personal issues, we will never truly know. Anne, for her part, was confused and frightened. She had done everything asked of her, followed orders from abroad, and tried her best to please a king who remained distant. She was, by all accounts, gentle and good-humored, but she could not become what Henry wanted. By July of that same year, just 6 months into the marriage, Henry sought annulment. He claimed non-consummation and pre-contracts on Anne's side. Remarkably, Anne did not resist. She agreed to the annulment, wrote a gracious letter of acceptance, and was rewarded handsomely for her cooperation. The court, always dangerous for women who displeased a king, became a place of safety for her, and rather than peril. She was given a generous settlement, including multiple homes, lands, and a lifetime income. She was granted the title, the king's beloved sister, and invited to court events. Unlike Henry's other wives, and maintained a cordial relationship with him until his death. She watched from the sidelines as Catherine Howard rose and fell. She dined with Princess Mary and Princess Elizabeth, forming bonds with the young women who would shape England's future. And even outlived Henry himself, one of only 2 wives to do so. Her hidden life is not one of passion or tragedy, but quiet triumph. She managed to escape the fate of queens before her. No tower, no trial, no sword. She adjusted, survived, and even thrived in a country that was never meant to be her home. Anne of Cleves might have been an outsider, and her reign as queen may have lasted barely 6 months. But in the end, she won something far rarer than power. She won peace. And in doing so, she left behind a story of quiet resilience, often forgotten, but worth remembering. Part 8. Catherine Howard, the young rose in the Lion's Court. Catherine Howard entered Henry VIII's life like a breath of spring air. She was youthful, vibrant, and full of the innocence that Henry believed he had lost forever. To a king in decline, aging, injured, and haunted by past betrayals, Catherine was more than a companion. She was hope. A chance to reclaim his lost virility, his fading glory, and his desire for adoration. Catherine was a cousin of Anne Boleyn, but her upbringing had been far less refined. Born around 1523, she was sent as a child to live with her step-grandmother, the Dowager Duchess of Norfolk. There, in a household with lax supervision, Catherine grew up surrounded by other young wards, laughing, dancing, and forming flirtations far from the gaze of proper courtly Tudors. She was not prepared for the demands of queenship. But she was beautiful, and in the Tudor court, that could be more than enough. At roughly 16 or 17 years old, she became a lady-in-waiting to Anne of Cleves. Henry already soured on and quickly turned his attention to Catherine's fresh face and playful charm. She was everything and was not, youthful, sensual, and English. By July 1540, just days after the annulment of his 4th marriage, Henry married Catherine Howard. To the world, it looked like a fairy tale, the young girl who captured the heart of a king. But behind the velvet gowns and public pageants, Catherine was drowning in a world she barely understood. She was surrounded by older, more experienced courtiers, many of whom sought to use her influence for their own ends. She had few allies and even fewer mentors. Her cousin, Thomas Howard, the Duke of Norfolk, had pushed her forward as part of family power play. Yet once crowned, Catherine was expected to be silent, obedient, and above all, spotless. But Catherine had secrets. Before her marriage to Henry, she had formed 2 close attachments: Henry Manox, her music teacher, and later Francis Derham, with whom she may have believed herself betrothed. Though these events had taken place before she became queen, in the paranoid world of Tudor politics, the past was never safely buried. Worse still, rumors began to swirl that Catherine was meeting Thomas Culpeper, a handsome courtier, in secret while married to the king. When the truth began to emerge in late 1541, it fell like a hammer. A former member of the Dowager Duchess's household revealed Catherine's youthful indiscretions. An investigation was launched, and soon both her past and her present behavior were laid bare. Letters, testimonies, and confessions were collected, whether by force, fear, or truth. Henry was devastated. He had believed Catherine to be a gift from God, the wife who would restore his joy. Now, he saw her as a traitor. Unlike Anne Boleyn, Catherine had no powerful allies to defend her. She was arrested in November and imprisoned at Sion Abbey before being taken to the Tower of London. In February 1542, she was executed on Tower Green, the same place where her cousin Anne Boleyn had died. She was no more than 19 years old. Her final words, by some accounts, were full of regret. "I'd die a queen, but I would rather have died the wife of Culpeper." Catherine's life was short, and her reign even shorter. But her story was not simply one of scandal. It was the tragedy of a girl thrust into a lion's court, used as a pawn, then discarded when the game turned against her. Her hidden life reminds us that beauty could be a blessing or a curse, and that youth in the Tudor court was never enough to save you. Part 9. Catherine Parr, the queen who outlived the king. By the time Catherine Parr became Henry VIII's 6th and final wife, she had already lived a life that would have satisfied most Tudor women. Twice widowed by the age of 31, she was no stranger to the duties of a noblewoman: loyalty, piety, diplomacy, and discretion. But when she married the King of England in July 1543, Catherine Parr stepped into a role far more dangerous than any she had held before. She was no naive courtier or ambitious debutante. She was a survivor, and she was about to become far more than just the king's consort. Catherine Parr was well-educated, fluent in several languages, and deeply intellectual. Unlike many women of her time, she had a passion for theology and reformist religious thought. Her household became a quiet center of learning and Protestant discourse, attracting scholars and thinkers who were cautiously shaping England's religious future. She encouraged the education of young Princess Elizabeth, helping to cultivate the girl's future brilliance. She also maintained a relationship with Princess Mary, striving to heal the divisions that had fractured the royal family. When Henry married Catherine, he was aging rapidly. Plagued by ulcers, paranoia, and chronic pain, the king was a shadow of the warrior prince he once was. Catherine took on the role of nurse as much as wife. She dressed his wounds, soothed his temper, and managed the court with a careful, capable hand. But Catherine was no mere caretaker. She also took bold steps in publishing, writing religious texts under her own name, including prayers or meditations, and later the Lamentation of a Sinner. She became the first Queen of England to publish a book in English under her own name. For a woman to speak so publicly on matters of religion was a risk, especially under a king who had executed wives for far less. And indeed, her reformist leanings nearly cost her life. In 1546, conservative factions at court grew wary of her influence over Henry, particularly her open support of Protestantism. A warrant for her arrest was drawn up. But Catherine, ever strategist, threw herself at Henry's feet and claimed she had only spoken of religious matters to distract him from his ailments and to learn from his great wisdom. Whether Henry believed her or merely found her flattery irresistible, the warrant was cancelled. She had talked her way out of danger, something none of Henry's previous wives had managed. When Henry died in January 1547, Catherine Parr became the Queen Dowager. For the first time in years, she had freedom. And she used it to pursue the man she had truly loved before Henry had intervened, Thomas Seymour, the brother of Jane Seymour. Their marriage was swift, passionate, and ultimately troubled. Seymour was ambitious and reckless, and his flirtation with the young Princess Elizabeth, who lived in their household, cast a long shadow. Catherine gave birth to a daughter, Mary, in 1548, her first child. But the joy was short-lived. Catherine died of childbed fever just days later, the same fate that had claimed Jane Seymour before her. She died not as a queen, but as a woman finally living for herself. And though her story ends in sorrow, her life was marked by quiet resilience and unwavering intellect. Catherine Parr was more than Henry's final wife. She was a bridge between medieval queenship and the Renaissance woman. Educated, thoughtful, and fiercely independent, she helped lay the foundation for the reign of Elizabeth I. Her hidden life was one of books, ideas, and careful survival. She outlived the king, but not the weight of his legacy, and in doing so, carved out a legacy all her own. Part 10. Queens in the Shadow of the Crown, a sisterhood of survivors and victims. The 6 women who shared the title of Henry VIII's wives were, in many ways, bound together by a thread far stronger than love or loyalty. They were women thrust into the spotlight of one of history's most tumultuous courts, all playing roles that were determined less by their own choices than by the ambitions, whims, and insecurities of a king. Yet, in the shadow of the crown, each one's story is uniquely marked by both triumph and tragedy. Their lives, despite their apparent differences, were interwoven by the same forces of fate, politics, and power. For Catherine of Aragon, the longest of Henry's wives, her years as queen were defined by devotion to both her marriage and her faith. She withstood years of humiliation and betrayal, but always remained steadfast in her belief that she was the true Queen of England. Her story, one of quiet strength and unwavering faith, is a testament to the endurance of a woman who refused to be cast aside. And Boleyn's life, by contrast, was one of bold ambition, flirtation with fate, and sharp wit. Her rise to the throne was swift and dramatic, but her fall was equally quick, propelled by the same king who had once adored her. In the end, and was the first to experience the king's fatal temper, but also became the symbol of how the court could destroy those who dared to play too fiercely with the king's affections. Jane Seymour's brief reign as queen stands as a sharp contrast to Anne's flamboyance and Catherine's quiet strength. She was the one who gave Henry what he most desired, a male heir. But it was a gift that would cost her life. Her death shortly after giving birth to Edward is a poignant reminder of the physical toll queenship could exact, even when a woman seemed to have succeeded where others failed. And of Cleves, the woman who never truly became queen, lives on as a figure of both failure and survival. Her marriage to Henry was annulled quickly, yet she was one of the few who managed to escape the violent political storms that marked the lives of her predecessors. And survival in a foreign court is a story of adaptability and grace, proving that sometimes the greatest strength comes in the form of a graceful exit. Catherine Howard, youthful and naive, became a victim of the court's deadly politics. Her beauty and charm were not enough to save her from the accusations of infidelity and treason. Her death, executed by the king who had once adored her, marked the tragic end of a young life swallowed by the shadows of Tudor power struggles. Yet Catherine's story is also a warning of how quickly the whims of the monarch could destroy the most vulnerable. Finally, there is Catherine Parr, the survivor. She was the queen who lived through all, not by outlasting the king, but by adapting, surviving, and ultimately taking control of her own fate. Her ability to maintain her dignity and intellectual pursuits in the face of danger set her apart from her predecessors. But her story is also one of compromise, knowing when to speak and when to remain silent, when to risk everything, and when to save herself. Together, these 6 women form a sisterhood of survivors and victims, each shaped by the king they married, but also defined by their personal strengths and weaknesses. Their stories are not just those of queens who stood at the pinnacle of power, but of women who lived in a world where their fates were determined by forces beyond their control. The hidden lives of these women are not only marked by their relationships with Henry VIII, but also by their relationships with each other. They were rivals, confidants, and witnesses to each other's struggles. Despite the bitter rivalries and betrayals, there was a certain solidarity among them, a shared understanding of what it meant to live in the relentless glare of the Tudor court. They were, in a way, all sisters under the crown, bound together by the same dangers, desires, and the burdens of power. Part 11. The Legacy of the 6 Wives, Shaping England's Future. The 6 wives of Henry VIII may have had lives marked by personal struggles, courtly intrigue, and tragic ends, but their collective legacy is far more enduring than their individual fates. Their influence on England, politically, religiously, and culturally, helped shape the very fabric of a nation's future. Through their marriages, actions, and the children they bore, these women contributed to the rise of the Tudor dynasty and the profound transformation of English society. The first, Catherine of Aragon, is remembered for her unwavering devotion to her faith and her role as the mother of the future queen, Mary I. Her marriage to Henry VIII, though ultimately torn apart by his desire for a male heir, set in motion a religious revolution that would change the face of Europe. Henry's divorce from Catherine and his subsequent break with the Roman Catholic Church created a new religious path for England, one that would ripple through the centuries. Though Catherine never witnessed the full impact of her sacrifice, it was her rejection that set the stage for England's split from the papacy and the establishment of the Church of England. And Boleyn, whose rise and fall became the stuff of legend, played a similarly transformative role in England's religious evolution. Her daughter Elizabeth I would go on to reign over one of the most powerful and culturally significant periods in English history, the Elizabethan era. Anne's legacy, however, is not solely tied to her daughter's reign. Her ambitious and passionate nature ignited the English Reformation, and despite her tragic execution, she ensured that her family's line would continue, shaping England's future for generations. Jane Seymour's legacy is perhaps most marked by the birth of Edward VI, the boy king who would briefly usher in Protestant reforms in England. Though her life was tragically short, Jane's son would become the first monarch to firmly establish the Protestant faith in England, laying the groundwork for religious upheavals that would follow. Her role as the mother of England's first Protestant king makes her a key figure in the shaping of the nation's religious future, even if her life was largely overshadowed by those who came before and after her. Anna Cleves, though her marriage to Henry VIII was brief and unconsummated, left an unexpected legacy in her survival and diplomatic role. Her ability to navigate the dangerous waters of the Tudor court after her annulment, and her continued influence in royal matters gave her a unique place in history. Anne's lasting impact was one of political pragmatism, as she managed to maintain both her wealth and a respectable position within the royal family, outliving Henry and his subsequent wives. Catherine Howard's legacy, while marred by her tragic downfall, can be seen in the cautionary tales of the dangers of youthful naivety and courtly seduction. Her story is a warning about the precarious nature of power in the Tudor court, where innocence could easily become a liability and ambition a fatal flaw. Her fate, though tragic, serves as a reminder of the harsh reality faced by those who entered the royal fold unprepared for its dangerous politics. Catherine Parr, the last of Henry's wives, outlived the king and became a widow with great influence, but it was her lasting contribution to the intellectual life of England that stands as her greatest achievement. Her works, particularly her writings on religion, helped shape the future of the English Reformation. She was an intellectual, a woman who helped steer the course of England's theological future by fostering education and religious debate. Her legacy is one of survival, wisdom, and the ability to thrive in a world that sought to limit the influence of women. Together, these 6 women shaped the course of English history in ways far greater than they could have known. Their children, Mary, Elizabeth, and Edward, would eventually rule over a nation transformed by their mothers' lives and decisions. It was through their daughters that the Tudor dynasty flourished, with Elizabeth I's reign marking a golden age of English culture and power. But beyond the reigns of their children, the 6 wives of Henry VIII left behind a legacy of religious and political change that would endure well into the next centuries. Their stories, now told through history's lens, reveal how the actions of these queens, often victims of circumstance, power struggles, and ambition, helped craft the future of a nation that would go on to dominate the world stage. They were women of courage, strength, and often quiet defiance, and their hidden lives offer invaluable insight into the complexity of the Tudor court and the broader story of England's rise to prominence. Part 12. The Myth of the Tudor Queens: Fact, Fiction, and Historical Memory. The 6 wives of Henry VIII have been immortalized in the annals of history, their lives shaped by both fact and fiction. But what we know of these women, from their personal stories to their reigns, is often a blend of historical truth, royal propaganda, and cultural myth-making. The Tudor queens were not just women in a patriarchal world. They were symbols, vessels for the political and social changes of their time. As such, their narratives have been crafted and recrafted over the centuries, shifting to reflect the values, interests, and biases of different eras. At the time of their lives, many of the queens were subjects of intense public scrutiny and royal portrayal. And Boleyn, for example, was not only seen as the king's mistress and second wife, but also as a political figure who pushed the boundaries of traditional queenship. Her ambitious nature, combined with the king's obsession with her, led to a personal and public drama that captivated the nation. After her execution, however, her legacy became entangled with rumors of witchcraft and adultery, fueled by the political enemies who sought to destroy her name. Thus, Anne's story became a cautionary tale of both power and peril, a myth that obscured her own ambitions and intellect. Similarly, Catherine Howard's tragic downfall was exaggerated and sensationalized. Her youth, beauty, and supposed sexual indiscretions were used as a vehicle to showcase the dangers of unchecked female sexuality in the Tudor court. She became a symbol of a naive young girl who was punished for her mistakes, a narrative that overshadowed her own personality, desires, and struggles within the royal court. Catherine's life was reduced to a cautionary tale of moral failure, with little attention given to the pressures of courtly life and the complex web of political intrigue that ultimately led to her death. Catherine of Aragon's legacy, on the other hand, is one of dignity and piety in the face of betrayal. Yet even her story has been colored by the narrative of victimhood, as she has been portrayed as the steadfast queen wronged by the king's desire for a son. While it is true that her marriage to Henry VIII was dissolved under painful circumstances, Catherine was also a woman of great personal strength, deeply devoted to her faith, and her daughter, Mary. Her image as the wrong queen has at times overshadowed her diplomatic abilities and the role she played in shaping the early years of England's relationship with Spain and the Holy Roman Empire. Jane Seymour, the wife who gave Henry VIII his longed-for son, has largely been reduced to a symbol of maternal sacrifice. Her death in childbirth cemented her role in history as the beloved mother of Edward VI, but has often obscured her own identity. Her quiet, dutiful nature was celebrated during her brief life, but after her death, she became little more than a footnote in the saga of Henry's wives. Few recall Jane's influence in her own right, preferring instead to focus on her contribution to the royal line, which provided Henry with the heir he desired. Anne of Cleves, meanwhile, has enjoyed something of a revisionist renaissance in the years following her divorce from Henry. Once scorned as the ugly bride who failed to please the king, and has since been remembered with more sympathy, her pragmatism and ability to navigate the treacherous waters of the Tudor court allowed her to not only survive, but thrive after her annulment. Today, she's often celebrated for her charm and diplomatic acumen, with much of the myth surrounding her ugliness dismissed as the product of royal spin. Catherine Parr's legacy has been similarly shaped by historical memory, but her intellectual contributions have begun to receive more attention in modern retellings. Once viewed primarily as the last of Henry's wives, Catherine is now recognized as a key figure in the intellectual and religious developments of the English Reformation. Her role in fostering Protestant thought and her significant influence on the education of her stepchildren, particularly Elizabeth I, has led to a re-evaluation of her legacy as more than just a royal consort. The myths surrounding these women have persisted for centuries, fed by the works of historians, writers, and artists alike. Each of Henry VIII's wives has been framed, sometimes unfairly, as a symbol of the societal anxieties of their time, from religious reform to the role of women in power. Over time, these queens have evolved from historical figures into almost mythological characters, their stories constantly reshaped to fit the cultural contexts of each new generation. In this ever-changing tapestry of fact and fiction, the truth of their lives, their hopes, fears, and personal struggles has often been overshadowed. Yet the hidden lives of these 6 women are more than just the myths surrounding them. They were individuals with their own dreams, weaknesses, and triumphs, whose legacies continue to shape our understanding of both the Tudor dynasty and the role of women in history. Part 13. The 6 Wives in Popular Culture, from Stage to Screen. The stories of Henry VIII's 6 wives have been woven into the fabric of popular culture for centuries, their lives immortalized in plays, novels, films, and even musicals. These women, once figures of history, have transformed into symbols of ambition, betrayal, love, and tragedy, capturing the imaginations of audiences around the world. But how have their lives been adapted, and what does the portrayal of these queens in popular culture tell us about society's evolving view of the past? One of the earliest and most influential representations of the 6 wives came through William Shakespeare's work, particularly in his play Henry VIII. While the play is more focused on the political drama of the reign, Shakespeare's portrayal of Henry's wives set the stage for later interpretations of their characters as pivotal figures in the unfolding of England's destiny. Their lives were already beginning to be seen as symbolic, emblematic of the turbulent and often destructive nature of royal marriages. In the 20th century, popular culture began to explore the personal lives of these women in more depth. One of the most famous adaptations was The 6 Wives of Henry VIII, a 1970 British television series that brought their stories to life for a new generation. Each episode delved into the life of one wife, focusing on her relationship with Henry and her struggles within the Tudor court. The series, though dramatized, made a significant effort to portray each woman as a complex individual, highlighting their hopes, aspirations, and ultimate fates. The 2003 musical 6 took a bold and modern approach to the story of the 6 wives, reimagining them as fierce, empowered women who tell their own stories in a contemporary pop style. By blending historical events with modern sensibilities, 6 gives voice to each wife, allowing them to reclaim their narrative and challenge the traditional depiction of them as passive victims of a tyrannical king. The musical's energetic performances and feminist reinterpretation have resonated with audiences worldwide, reflecting changing attitudes toward gender and power in both history and modern society. Films and television series have also played a major role in shaping the image of Henry VIII's wives. The 2008 film The Other Boleyn Girl, based on the novel by Philippa Gregory, brought the story of Anne and Mary Boleyn to the forefront, emphasizing the rivalry between the 2 sisters and their relationships with the king. While the film took artistic liberties, it underscored Anne Boleyn's ambitious nature and the destructive consequences of her affair with Henry. Similarly, the 2015 Showtime series The Tudors gave each of the 6 wives significant screen time, though it often prioritized drama over historical accuracy. Nonetheless, these portrayals have helped shape the popular image of the Tudor queens, often focusing on their beauty, their political maneuvering, and their eventual downfalls. The 1991 television movie Catherine of Aragon, The True Queen, and other historical dramas also began to reshape how Catherine was perceived. Rather than simply the spurned wife of Henry VIII, Catherine was portrayed as a woman of dignity and resilience who stood firm in her faith and fought for her daughter's future. This more sympathetic portrayal contrasted with earlier depictions of Catherine as simply a victim of Henry's tyranny. Modern adaptations such as The Queen's Necklace, 2016, and Lady in Waiting, 2018, continue to bring the lives of these women into the public consciousness, often presenting them as real, multidimensional characters rather than just the wives of a notorious king. Through the lens of contemporary storytelling, the queens are increasingly shown as political players in their own right, navigating the dangerous waters of Tudor England with agency and ambition. In each of these retellings, the portrayal of Henry VIII's wives reflects the values of the time in which they were created. From the earliest Shakespearean representations to the empowering musical Six, these women have been reinterpreted and reimagined to fit the social and cultural landscape of each era. While the specifics of their lives remain rooted in history, popular culture has given them the freedom to transcend their roles as mere wives and queens, allowing them to be seen as women with agency, voice, and power. These modern portrayals of Henry VIII's wives have allowed us to reconnect with their stories in new ways. In today's retellings, we are reminded that although their lives were often defined by the men they married, these women were, in many respects, women of their time who navigated their world with ambition, courage, and resilience. Their stories, shaped by history but often filtered through the lens of popular culture, continue to captivate audiences and reveal the enduring relevance of the Tudor queens in our collective imagination. Part 14. The lasting impact of the Six Wives, from history to modern feminism. The lives of Henry VIII's six wives have left a lasting imprint on history, not only in the context of Tudor England, but also in the way modern society understands gender, power, and female agency. Though these women lived in a time when their roles were defined by their relationships with powerful men, their personal stories and struggles continue to resonate with contemporary movements focused on women's rights and empowerment. The impact of their lives reaches far beyond their roles as consorts to a king. Their legacies speak to the broader history of women's experiences in patriarchal societies and their fight for recognition and autonomy. From Catherine of Aragon's determined defense of her marriage and faith to Anne Boleyn's ambitious rise and tragic fall, the Six Wives offer complex, multifaceted portraits of women who navigated oppressive systems and challenged them in ways both subtle and overt. Their stories are not just about victimhood, they are about agency, survival, and the pursuit of power in a world that often denied them the ability to control their own fates. Even in their struggles, they demonstrated resilience, intelligence, and an ability to shape the course of history, paving the way for future generations of women to assert their own voices. In the context of modern feminism, the Six Wives of Henry VIII have become icons of resistance and defiance against patriarchal control. Anne Boleyn, often viewed through the lens of romanticized tragedy, is now seen as a woman who fought for her position and her beliefs, navigating the treacherous political waters of the Tudor court with unparalleled ambition. Her rise to the throne, although fleeting, demonstrated a woman's ability to change the course of history, albeit at great personal cost. Her tragic end, often interpreted as the result of male political maneuvering, has also become a powerful symbol of the consequences of women who challenge the status quo. Catherine of Aragon, on the other hand, has become a symbol of unwavering faith and strength in the face of betrayal. Her refusal to accept Henry's annulment has inspired countless women who have fought for their rights, their marriages, and their families, even when confronted with overwhelming societal pressures. Catherine's story reflects the complexities of a woman who is not simply a passive victim of Henry's desires, but an active participant in shaping her own legacy. Her commitment to her daughter, Mary I, and her steadfast resolve in the face of divorce are emblematic of the fight for women's voices to be heard, even in the most difficult circumstances. The plight of Jane Seymour, who died young after giving Henry VIII his much-desired male heir, has led to a reassessment of her role in history. Rather than being seen merely as a footnote in Henry's marital saga, Jane is now recognized as a symbol of maternal sacrifice and strength. Her legacy challenges the traditional narrative of women being defined solely by their relationships to men, showing that women can also influence history through their roles as mothers, caregivers, and survivors. Anne of Cleves, often mocked in her time for her appearance and her swift divorce from Henry, has undergone a dramatic shift in her portrayal. Once seen as an unfortunate pawn in the royal game, Anne is now regarded as a woman who navigated her difficult circumstances with intelligence and poise. Her ability to secure her position within the court and outlive Henry's subsequent marriages has made her a figure of admiration for women who, despite setbacks, thrive in a male-dominated world. Catherine Howard's tragic story has also evolved in modern retellings, with a growing recognition of the pressures placed on young women in royal courts. Her youth, beauty, and naivety have become the focal point of feminist reinterpretations, showing how power dynamics and societal expectations shaped her fate. In today's discussions of gender and power, Catherine's story is seen as a cautionary tale of how women's sexual agency has historically been punished and used against them, shedding light on the double standards that continue to impact women's lives today. Finally, Catherine Parr, who outlived Henry and became an influential figure in her own right, is now celebrated for her intellectual contributions and her role in the Protestant Reformation. Her marriage to Henry is often overshadowed by her later work, particularly her writings on religion and her influence over her stepchildren, including the future Queen Elizabeth I. Catherine's legacy is a testament to the power of women who navigate the complexities of marriage and motherhood while also contributing to the cultural and intellectual life of their time. The six wives of Henry VIII, with their tragic and powerful stories, have come to represent not just the past but the ongoing fight for women's autonomy, voice, and power. Their struggles have inspired generations of women to question societal expectations and to fight for a place at the table of history. Their stories have been told, retold, and reframed, and as modern feminists continue to explore the intersections of gender and power, the lives of these six women remain an important part of the conversation. Through them, we see how the past continues to inform the present and how the fight for women's rights, in all its complexity, is an ongoing journey. Part 15. The personal stories of the six wives, what we can learn from their lives. The lives of Henry VIII's six wives continue to fascinate and inspire not only historians but also everyday people who seek to understand the complexities of human relationships, power dynamics, and survival in a world defined by rigid gender norms. Each of these women's personal stories offers valuable lessons, not only in the context of the turbulent Tudor court, but also in broader reflections on ambition, resilience, sacrifice, and self-determination. Despite the tragedy, betrayal, and heartache they experienced, the six wives stand as symbols of strength in a world that often denied them control over their own fates. Catherine of Aragon, the first wife, provides one of the clearest examples of the strength that can come from faith and conviction. Her refusal to accept Henry's annulment and her steadfast defense of her marriage to him were not just acts of piety, they were acts of personal empowerment. She faced great personal suffering, from the emotional turmoil of Henry's infidelity to the political machinations that ultimately tore her marriage apart, but she never wavered in her commitment to her beliefs. Catherine's story teaches us the importance of standing firm in our convictions, even when the world seems set against us. And Boleyn's story, while tragic, offers a profound lesson in ambition, agency, and the price of power. Anne's rise to power as Henry VIII's second wife was nothing short of remarkable, as she navigated the intricate and often dangerous Tudor court to win the king's heart. Yet despite her intelligence and political savvy, her downfall was swift and brutal, a stark reminder of the fragility of power, particularly when it is held by women in a patriarchal society. Anne's life teaches us the risks and rewards of ambition, the delicate balance of holding power, and the need to remain vigilant when navigating systems that seek to control and manipulate women's lives. Jane Seymour's life, though shorter than the others, provides a profound lesson in sacrifice and quiet strength. She died just days after giving birth to Henry's long-awaited male heir, Edward VI, and was celebrated for fulfilling the king's deepest desire. Yet, Jane's legacy is more than just motherhood. It is the story of a woman who quietly accepted her role, endured the pressures placed upon her, and ultimately gave everything for her family. From Jane's story, we learn the power of selflessness and the strength that comes from embracing our roles with dignity and grace, even in the face of personal loss. Anne of Cleves, often portrayed as a pawn in Henry's game of marriages, is a testament to adaptability and resilience in the face of rejection. Initially scorned by Henry for her appearance, Anne's swift divorce could have been the end of her story, but instead, she navigated her new life with incredible poise. She maintained a good relationship with Henry, and even outlived many of the other wives, securing a comfortable position in the royal court. Anne's story reminds us of the importance of resilience, the ability to adapt to unexpected changes, and the strength it takes to move forward when life does not unfold as we had planned. Catherine Howard's tragic fate teaches us about the dangers of youth, inexperience, and the consequences of being caught in the political web of the Tudor court. Catherine was young, beautiful, and impulsive, qualities that worked against her in a society that expected women to be both obedient and virtuous. Her relationship with Henry, based on passion and desire, ultimately led to her execution when her past indiscretions were uncovered. From Catherine's story, we learn the importance of self-awareness, the risks of naivety in environments that exploit vulnerability, and the heavy price women often pay for the sins of men and society. Finally, Catherine Parr's life offers a reflection on intellectual empowerment and the importance of second chances. After surviving Henry, Catherine went on to marry again and played a significant role in the education of her stepchildren, including the future Elizabeth I. Catherine's intellectual pursuits and her advocacy for the Protestant Reformation are reminders that, even within the confines of marriage, women can contribute to society in powerful ways. Her story teaches us that it is never too late to redefine ourselves, pursue our passions, and leave a legacy that extends beyond traditional roles. The personal stories of Henry VIII's 6 wives remind us that history is not just made by kings and politicians, but also by the women who navigated complex and often dangerous environments with courage, grace, and strength. Their stories continue to offer lessons for us today about the power of conviction, the risks of ambition, the strength in sacrifice, and the ability to adapt when life takes unexpected turns. While the political dynamics of their lives may be rooted in the past, the personal journeys of these 6 women speak to timeless human experiences, making their stories ever relevant to modern audiences. In the end, these 6 wives, each with their own unique legacy, continue to shape our understanding of the past and offer valuable lessons for the present. Their lives remind us that history is not just the story of kings and battles, but the story of the women who, though often forgotten or overshadowed, were the quiet architects of change in their time. Part 16. Legacy of the 6 Wives, How Their Stories Have Endured Through Time. The 6 wives of Henry VIII are not just historical figures. Their stories have endured for centuries, transcending the confines of the Tudor court and entering the global consciousness as symbols of love, ambition, tragedy, and resilience. Their lives have been examined, dissected, and reimagined countless times, shaping the way we understand not just the Tudor dynasty, but the broader social and political landscape of early modern England. From the ink of chroniclers to the screens of modern film and television, the legacy of these women continues to captivate the imagination and provoke reflection. One of the ways their legacy has endured is through literature. From the earliest historical accounts, such as the works of Raphael Holinshed and Edward Hall, to the novels of the 19th and 20th centuries, the 6 wives have been central figures in English storytelling. The stories of Catherine of Aragon and Boleyn and their fellow wives have served as the basis for numerous historical novels, each adding layers of complexity to their personal narratives. Writers like Philippa Gregory, whose best-selling novels The Other Boleyn Girl and The Boleyn Inheritance brought Anne and her contemporaries back into the public eye, have helped to ensure that the stories of these women are kept alive in popular culture. Their books, while fictionalized, have sparked renewed interest in the 6 wives, encouraging readers to explore the history behind the drama and uncover new facets of the women's lives. In the realm of film and television, the 6 wives have also maintained a prominent presence. From the classic portrayal in Anne of a Thousand Days, 1969, to the more recent The Tudors, 2007 to 2010, these women have been given both large and small roles in retellings of the Tudor saga. Films and series dedicated to their stories have helped to bring their voices to the screen, sometimes through historical accuracy and at other times through creative interpretation. In many of these portrayals, the women are given more agency than they might have had in life, with modern adaptations exploring their personal feelings, desires, and motivations. This evolution in their representation reflects a broader shift in the way society has come to view historical women, no longer as passive figures defined solely by the men they married, but as active participants in their own narratives. As their stories have continued to be reimagined in new media, the 6 wives have also become subjects of scholarly research and debate. Historians have long been fascinated by the political, religious, and social dynamics that shape their lives, but recent studies have focused on the more personal aspects of their experiences, examining how their identities were formed within the constraints of the Tudor court. Their stories have inspired scholars to delve into questions of power, gender, and the roles of women in history, and through their work, the 6 wives have been placed within a broader context of women's history and social change. In this way, their legacy continues to evolve as new generations of historians shed light on their lives in ways that challenge long-standing perceptions. The 6 wives' impact is not limited to historical or cultural domains. Their legacy is also deeply felt in the realm of feminism. As previously discussed, their stories have been embraced as part of the ongoing conversation about women's rights, power, and autonomy. Anne Boleyn's rise and fall, Catherine of Aragon's resistance, and Catherine Parr's intellectual influence all serve as touchstones in the fight for women's rights in both historical and modern contexts. Their legacies are a reminder that the struggle for gender equality is not a new phenomenon, but one that has roots stretching back to the early modern period. In this way, the Six Wives have become symbols not only of historical significance, but also of the ongoing efforts to challenge patriarchal systems of control. In the 21st century, the continued fascination with the Six Wives shows no signs of waning. New adaptations, documentaries, and novels ensure that their stories remain in the public eye, continually evolving as they are filtered through the lens of contemporary issues. The Six Wives have become enduring icons of history, not just as the wives of one of England's most famous kings, but as women whose lives offer invaluable insights into power, gender, and the human experience. As their stories are retold and reinterpreted, they remind us that history is not a static narrative, but one that is continually reshaped and brought to life by the changing perspectives of each generation. Ultimately, the legacy of the Six Wives endures because their stories are not just about the past, but about the present and the future. In a world that continues to grapple with questions of gender, power, and equality, the lessons drawn from their lives remain as relevant as ever. Their experiences, filled with triumph, tragedy, and complexity, continue to offer a rich source of inspiration, reflection, and understanding for anyone interested in the intersection of history and the human condition. Part 17, The Final Years, How the Lives of the Six Wives Shaped England's Future. The Six Wives of Henry VIII were not just pivotal figures in their own time. Their lives, decisions, and legacies played a crucial role in shaping the future of England. From religious reformations to political alliances, the decisions made by Catherine of Aragon and Boleyn, Jane Seymour, and of Cleves, Catherine Howard, and Catherine Parr altered the trajectory of the Tudor dynasty, and by extension, the history of England itself. Though many of these women faced tragic ends, their influence reverberated far beyond their personal misfortunes, deeply impacting the monarchy, England's religious landscape, and the nation's future. One of the most immediate and profound effects of their marriages to Henry VIII was the religious upheaval they sparked. Catherine of Aragon's refusal to accept Henry's annulment set the stage for the English Reformation, during which Henry broke from the Catholic Church and established the Church of England. And Boleyn, whose marriage to Henry was the catalyst for this break, became the symbol of the king's defiance of the Pope and the Church's authority. This seismic shift in religious power forever changed England's religious makeup, and while Anne's role in the Reformation is often overshadowed by her tragic death, her influence in its early stages cannot be denied. Her daughter, Elizabeth I, would later solidify this Protestant legacy, ensuring that the Reformation endured long after Anne's execution. Similarly, the birth of Edward VI to Jane Seymour, Henry's third wife, brought the Protestant Reformation into even sharper focus. Though Edward's reign was short, his commitment to Protestantism and his policies further entrenched the religious division between England and Rome. Jane Seymour's legacy, as the mother of England's first Protestant king, elevated her status in the historical narrative, despite her own death shortly after childbirth. Her role in shaping the religious direction of England, while often seen as secondary to her son's reign, was nevertheless an important link in the chain of events that would define the country's religious identity for centuries. Anne of Cleves, though her marriage to Henry was short-lived, had an enduring impact on England's political landscape. Her marriage to Henry was arranged for political reasons, but after the annulment, she maintained a cordial relationship with the king, which helped solidify her position as a trusted figure within the court. Her role as a diplomatic asset was further solidified when she became a stepmother to the future Elizabeth I, offering a degree of stability during Henry's tumultuous reign. Anne's ability to navigate the court's political intrigues and maintain her influence despite her failed marriage serves as a testament to her resilience and diplomatic skill. Catherine Howard, despite her tragic downfall, was part of the political drama that would shape the future of the English court. Her youthful beauty and her marriage to Henry marked a brief but significant period in Tudor history, one that influenced the rise of Elizabeth I's powerful court after Catherine's execution. Though Catherine's story is often seen through the lens of her mistakes and the consequences of her behavior, her life also highlights the precariousness of political and personal power in the Tudor court. The political instability that followed her execution helped set the stage for the stronger, more secure reign of Elizabeth I, whose leadership would ultimately bring stability to England. Catherine Parr, the final wife of Henry VIII, had perhaps the most lasting impact on the nation's future through her role as stepmother to Henry's surviving children, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth. Her influence over Elizabeth, particularly, was profound. Catherine's Protestant beliefs and intellectual leanings would greatly shape Elizabeth's future religious and political decisions. In addition to her role in guiding her stepchildren, Catherine was an influential figure in the Protestant Reformation and a strong advocate for the rights of women in the religious and intellectual spheres. Her legacy is one of intellectual and spiritual mentorship, ensuring that her stepchildren would go on to be influential rulers who would further define England's religious and political identity. Together, the 6 wives of Henry VIII left an indelible mark on England's history. Their personal lives, often marred by tragedy, were inextricably tied to the fate of the monarchy and the direction of the nation. Each wife, whether through their actions, their children, or their influence in the court, played a role in shaping England's religious identity, political stability, and future prosperity. In particular, the reigns of Elizabeth I and Edward VI, both shaped by their mothers, would establish the Protestant foundation that would define England for centuries. These women, despite being relegated to the periphery of history, were not just pawns in Henry VIII's marital game, but active participants in a larger narrative of national transformation. Their lives remind us that history is shaped not just by kings and emperors, but by the women who, in their own ways, influence the course of events and the shaping of a nation's future. Part 18, Final Reflections, How the Hidden Lives of the 6 Wives Reflect the Human Experience. The lives of Henry VIII's 6 wives are woven into the very fabric of England's history, yet their stories transcend the boundaries of time, offering reflections on themes that resonate across cultures and eras. In many ways, these women's experiences mirror the broader human condition, touching on universal aspects of love, power, ambition, sacrifice, and survival. Though each of the 6 wives lived in a dramatically different historical context, their stories hold up a mirror to the complexities of our own lives, with their struggles, choices, and legacies continuing to provide insight into the challenges we face today. At the heart of the 6 wives' stories is the theme of power, how it is sought, wielded, and lost. Each wife's relationship with Henry VIII reveals different facets of power and how it can shape a person's life, for better or for worse. Catherine of Aragon's steadfast refusal to relinquish her title, and Boleyn's ambition to become queen, and Catherine Howard's vulnerability to the whims of the court all show the ways in which power can be fragile and fleeting. These women, though wielding power in various forms, ultimately found that their status could be stripped away in an instant, often at the hands of the very men who had granted them it. Their stories serve as stark reminders that power, particularly for women in patriarchal societies, is never guaranteed and is often precariously held. Alongside the theme of power, the 6 wives' experiences speak to the profound human struggle for identity and self-determination. Each of these women, whether through their marriages or their personal ambitions, was forced to navigate a world that sought to define them by their relationships to men rather than their individual merits. Catherine of Aragon fought to retain her identity as the legitimate queen, and Boleyn sought to carve out a role for herself beyond the constraints of her gender, and Catherine Parr made her mark as an intellectual and a political figure in a time when women were rarely given such opportunities. Their struggles to assert their individuality within a restrictive and hierarchical system echo the ongoing fight for gender equality and self-expression in our own time. In this way, the 6 wives' stories continue to inspire those who seek autonomy and the freedom to define themselves on their own terms. Another key theme that emerges from their lives is the complexity of human relationships and the difficult choices that we all must face. The 6 wives were not just figures caught in a political drama, but real women with complex emotions, desires, and fears. Their marriages to Henry VIII were not simply political alliances. They were personal relationships marked by love, disappointment, betrayal, and loss. The emotional toll that each wife endured, from Catherine of Aragon's quiet grief to and Boleyn's passionate pursuit of power to Catherine Parr's role as a stepmother and wife, highlights the profound emotional labor involved in navigating relationships with power dynamics that often worked against them. In this way, their stories reflect the broader human experience of love, loss, and the emotional resilience required to face life's challenges. The sacrifices made by these women, whether it was Catherine of Aragon's unwavering loyalty to her marriage and Boleyn's pursuit of a throne that ultimately led to her execution, or Jane Seymour's selflessness in giving birth to a male heir at the cost of her own life, speak to the capacity for self-sacrifice that defines the human experience. Their lives remind us of the depth of personal sacrifice often required in the pursuit of love, duty, or ambition. Yet their stories also highlight the tragic consequences of these sacrifices, revealing the sometimes painful reality that, in a world shaped by power and status, personal fulfillment is often out of reach. In this sense, the six wives' lives stand as poignant reflections of the choices many of us must make when balancing our desires and obligations. Finally, the legacy of the six wives reflects the broader narrative of survival in the face of adversity. Despite their personal tragedies and heartbreaks, these women each found ways to survive and carve out lives for themselves, even when the odds were stacked against them. Anne of Cleves, after her marriage to Henry VIII ended, went on to live a long and relatively happy life. Catherine Parr, having outlived Henry, became a respected and influential figure in her own right. These women, through their resilience, demonstrate that survival is not just about physical endurance, but also about the ability to adapt, change, and find meaning in the face of overwhelming challenges. Their stories echo the universal human need for resilience and hope, reminding us that even in the most difficult of circumstances, there's always the possibility of renewal and transformation. The hidden lives of Henry VIII's six wives are not just relics of a distant past, they are timeless narratives of the human experience, filled with lessons on power, identity, sacrifice, and survival. As we continue to reflect on their lives and legacies, we are reminded that history is never simply a series of isolated events, but a tapestry of personal stories that illuminate the complexities of the human condition. The six wives' lives may have been shaped by the extraordinary forces of Tudor England, but in many ways their struggles and triumphs speak to us all across time and space, offering insights into the choices we all face as we navigate our own complex lives. Thanks for joining us on this journey through history. We hope you enjoyed exploring the hidden lives of the six wives of Henry VIII. Stay tuned for more captivating stories from the past. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated on all our upcoming videos.